will actually just get started. Ah, So, the thing that this session for me is about thinking about the radical potential of design in movement spaces, and lifting up the deep importance of design as parallel and creative strategy as parallel to our organizational strategies, to our communications and narrative strategies, and such and so forth. And so the idea for me is that we have to make cultural interventions as well as narrative interventions. And I particularly am invested and committed to making cultural interventions in regards to design. And so we'll talk about what that means. But all of this is in service to engaging people at mass. So a mantra that I really live by, Toni Cade Bambara, said that the role of the cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people is to make revolution irresistible. I truly believe that marginalized people deserve to experience the beauty, the luxury, the niceness, the best of the world as we fight for. We actually deserve to experience and embody what we want this world to look like as we are pushing forward and organizing and building power in order to actualize that world for all of us. And so I continuously say to myself in my work that, particularly when working with Black people, like Black people deserve to experience beautiful things. And they don't, and we shouldn't have to wait for that in the lifetime at which we reach revolution or we reach radical transformation. I grew up in a Christian fundamentalist cult, and so I spent the whole childhood with people living their whole life for the afterlife. And there's a way that I want people to experience heaven with each other in community, right here, right now. And I think in my lane, an area of body of work is using design to do that. And so Bell Hooks says the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It is to imagine what is possible. So often I have done organizing work for the past decade and a half. And I started when I was 14 years old. And so often we have beautiful stories that we curate and cultivate in service to building power. And communicators, storytellers, narrative strategists, all of these different folks contribute to that. Most of all, I would say, especially for people of color and marginalized identities, storytelling has been how we have fought to retain our cultures through colonialism, through white supremacy. And so those stories are usually curated in such beautiful ways. When as organizers and change makers, we articulate what is possible, what the future could look like if we won, it's often also important to build a creative strategy with artists to also illustrate what's possible, illustrate that imaginative, radical dreaming and revolutionary, radical imagination that we're building. And so the thing that I implore is that folks make the cultural interventions necessary with creative strategists as well as organizational strategists and narrative strategists as well. And so thinking about a cultural intervention. So when I say culture, I think culture has become a buzzword of sorts that folks use. Oh, let's do it for the culture. Oh, this is about the culture. So sometimes I think it gets lost I think that we're all using different definitions of what culture is when they say it. So these are my definitions of culture, and this is how I understand it. I understand culture within 3 dimensions. The first dimension is the material contributions that inform the social behavior, the beliefs, and presence of a people. I would say these are the assets that are created by a group of people that inform the social behavior, the belief system and value system of a group of people, and those assets contribute to how this group of people are experienced as a presence. And so some of those things are dance historically. Some of those things are clothing assets that I'm deeply interested in. There are art pieces, just some of those assets. And then another dimension of culture that I understand are the traditions and norms that are socially informed by a group's values, the storytelling, the art, design, music, dance, rituals, spirituality, and tradition. And so the traditions and norms might look like holidays, might look like religious rituals, sacred spaces, and things like that. That is, so when we talk about, some people celebrate Christmas, that's a particular culture. Quinceañeras, those are anchors of culture. And Kwanzaa is a specific thing, whether either end you fall on it, you like it, you might not. But it was a specific intervention, a cultural intervention for Black folks to try and figure out how could we build traditions that felt adjacent to the traditions that our ancestors potentially were engaged in. Where people might have felt lacking in culture or might have felt like there was a gap, folks tried to fill it by building their own cultural norms and traditions. So the final dimension that I understand culture within is a creation of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that in turn shift or cultivate a social environment. So there's a culture of an organization, right? The organizational culture. We often talk about the culture of different containers. And that for me is the shared attitude itself, the presence, how these people show up, how these folks interact with other folks, the values that we might be aligned around, or principles that we might be aligned around. We might have shared goals. These things are a different, like we're talking about a cultural climate, right? And so those things might inform the other dimensions of culture within the other dimensions. Eugen, I see your hand up.
Thanks. I'm not trying to make it too formal, but I do have a question. So when it comes to things like unwritten rules, like stuff you're supposed to do or not supposed to do, even though it's like no one says it, is that a third dimension, what you're describing as a third dimension?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I think that could fall within, I would say that those are absolutely, that absolutely is what I mean by the third dimension of culture. I think that it often also can fall in the second tradition, like the foods that are cooked on a specific holiday and things like that. Those to me, those are the things that anchor culture. Those are the cultural, those are like potentially cultural assets. And so I think that these are my 3 efforts at categorizing what people are materially talking about when they say culture. But I think that these 3 are fluid and flow into each other, and they don't, and a thing, a particular aspect of culture might not just fall in within one of these, if that makes sense. What I want folks to start doing is understanding things as culture So folks care about culture. So they care about the culture, organizational culture. So folks care about researching and understanding the culture of a community that they want to engage, and so that they contribute to the culture of a community. They replicate and honor the culture of a community in ways that our audiences and the communities that we want to mobilize feel reflected and seen, and not tokenized, patronized, or fetishized. Do any other folks have any questions around culture? Okay. So this is an example of BYP 100. This is a design. These are a series of designs that I was able to create. I would say that BYP 100 was a political project, is a political project and container for young Black people between the ages of 18 and 35. And BYP 100 came to be in 2013, in a moment where young Black folks were at mass coming to collective consciousness about the conditions that we were living in, and saying that these conditions were unacceptable. And young Black folks wanted to organize and build power and build community and build connection with other Black folks. And so there was a way that manifested within BYP 100. And so the visual, and that became the culture of BYP 100. So the visual culture had to align with the presence that these young Black folks from all over the country were curating with each other to bring more Black folks in and train them to be organizers and then build power together. And so this visually, thank you, Eugene. This visually were some of the things that were created to get people curious. And I think that's really important. The strategy here for me in the design of these different things, some of these things were stickers, some of these things were shirts, was that you would see a young Black person in one of these pieces and you would get curious. That hat, whenever one of those young organizers wore that hat, the FTP hat in the hood, Black folks would come up to them and be like, yeah, I don't fuck with police either. And this thing happened to my cousin, and such and such and such and such. So these things, these pieces of design, these cultural assets became tools that young Black folks could use to organize our communities into a political ideology, because they were conversation starters. And so I designed this, I put it on a Black organizer, and then I trust that Black organizer to do the rest, that starts the asset starts the conversation. And then the organizer, yes, Reza, just a second. Then the organizer's responsibility is to pull that person in and put them on a road to radicalizing ideology and organizing them and potentially mobilizing them to turn from activists, from community member to activist to potentially organizer, if that's the trajectory that they want to be on. Reza, can you name what the question is a little bit out loud?
Yeah, it's almost like an observation that I'm trying to put into a question, right? Mm-hmm. But like red, gold, and green, black, red, and green, these are all powerful, culturally familiar colors. Mm-hmm. And then the text and the copy on these are so specific, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what if it just said Black, queer, feminist future instead of fighting for it? If it just said are valuable instead of inherently valuable. It's almost a question more about your process, I think, and thinking about the fact that there are specific color and visual choices and specific text choices and how you think that. You see what I mean? It's not really a very easy question.
That's okay. So I think that the thing that I wanted to get at with BRP 100's anchoring colors for me were the Pan-African colors from Marcus Garvey. So the red, black, and green. I added gold into that because expanding on Pan-Africanism, I think the Ethiopian flag, as well as multiple Caribbean flags, have gold in them. And so there's a way that I wanted to make sure that Black folks across the diaspora felt. Ghana also has gold in their flag. There's a way that I wanted Black folks across the diaspora to feel reflected in the color scheme of BRP 100 and make sure that they knew that this was a space for all Black folks. And then I think that the idea, so this shirt on Tasha, you see the back of it through a Black queer feminist lens. On the front of that, it said, it said building Black futures. So building Black futures. When old folks in the hood saw that, they were like, right on, young partner, building Black futures. That's what we need to be doing. And then they see the back of it and it says through a Black queer feminist lens. They said, what? Well, why are you saying queer? That's a curse word. And then that invited organizers into a conversation. The Black women are inherently valuable is actually a sentence from the Combahee River Collective. And so when people would ask, like, okay, what you mean by that? Like, yeah, they're valuable. Why does it specifically say Black women are inherently valuable? What about other folks? Folks could talk about, because every organizer in that organization, it was a cultural norm that to be in this particular Black feminist organization, you had to be very familiar with the Combahee River Collective statement. And so then we got to talk about what did the Combahee River Collective mean when they said Black women are inherently valuable, that folks don't have to be producing, folks don't have to be a role. There's a way when a Black woman dies, and this happens across gender, but particularly when a Black woman dies, it's she was a sister, she was a mom, she was a wife. There's some utility that adds value to why that adds value to her personhood, or adds credibility to why it wasn't okay for her to be killed or for patriarchal violence to be enacted on her. And actually, we just want to be able to be the human being that we are, and that make us valuable enough for dignity, for self-determination, for power, for access, and for the necessary resources to live. And so I think that all of the language that were used in these different images were particular pillars of political thought that these folks could use to expound on in order to organize people into this political container, or at least get them curious enough to start researching different political concepts. Did that answer it? Okay, great. Another example of this work was the work with InfraBL in the midst of a global pandemic. The pandemic, as you all very well know, created a particular compounding of circumstances, and the compounding of those circumstances, I would say, brought people en masse into a collective consciousness. It was a moment where people built collective consciousness about different issues at mass. We had a health pandemic, we had an economic crisis around labor. We had around labor and capitalism. We saw the government for one of the very first times in our lifetime fail at responding to a health crisis. And so it made the government looked like it was within the limits of human productivity and effectiveness for the first time. There were mistakes happening every day and then the government made certain made certain concessions, like doing a rent freeze, sending people out money at mass, financial aid at mass, demonstrations that, the things that we've been fighting for decades and decades and decades, you all actually know how to do, and are actually possible to do. You all just decide not to do them. And so I would say that folks who might not be in the bubble of political consciousness were able to see that very visually. And so in response to that moment, and at the same time of all of those different circumstances, police are still finding the time and capacity to enact violence upon Black folks all over the country and all over the world. And so in that moment, InfraBL wanted to organize people around particular political stances, I would say. And so in the moment of folks uprising around George Floyd, I was able to design these masks. And I think the one mask said defund police, that was a specific political ask. And then the other mask said stop killing Black people. Still a powerful statement, but it was more apolitical. It was more apolitical in the sense that it didn't make a different political demand that could be a solution to killing Black folks. And so I think the other aspect here around particularly designing this as a cultural asset is how can you create something that people use every day in passing, that in this moment they have to use, so that, and it's fundamental to the things that they are wearing every day, so people can't help but see it. And in 2020, that was a mask. And then how do you create something organizationally for organizations when they're thinking about merchandise or things to give away? How do you create something that speaks to the moment and speaks to the ways people are being marginalized in a particular moment? Now, that's not to say anybody was being marginalized by wearing masks. I'm not a part of that crew, but saying that there's a health crisis. We want to make something that responds to that health crisis and shows that we are vigilant about a health crisis while also having to be vigilant around the extrajudicial killing of Black people by the police. And so it was a strategic decision to create these masks at mass and then pass these masks out at different uprisings that were happening all over the country. And so the way that I would say the tactic and way that I approach design is thinking about, raise your hand if you have ever engaged or heard of streetwear. Yeah. Okay. So streetwear is a culture where it's really a collector culture. Like, how can you collect the coolest sneaker? How can you collect the coolest article of clothing that different artists make and things like that? And so streetwear culture is people lining up for Jordans, a particular very nice sneaker that has a lot of demand. I wanted to figure out how do we create the hype of streetwear culture within movement, and instead of it having a capitalist end of like, I want to make this purchase because I want to be the first one to have this thing, the incentive was actually to contribute to Black political power by attending an action. So people really wanted this mask. People were like, where can I get it? Where can I find it? The only way you could access, plenty of people, thousands of people sent me messages online, especially these masks ended up being confiscated by the FBI when they were being mailed out to different states to be at their mass actions and rallies. They said that these were contraband and they held them probably for like 3 to 5 days. And so the only way that you could get one of these masks was to go to an action and to participate in political struggle. And so if you had the mask, that meant that you were engaged in some particular uprising throughout the country. And so those to me are different aspects and processes around how we figure out how we make cultural assets that move people to take political action, that move people into political containers. Do people have questions?
I love the simplicity of the design because of the both, it's obviously not a simple issue, but in a way it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so that I'm loving the parallels here again. Mm-hmm. No question, more of just like a, hey, here's a thing, and I said it, and that's, you respond if you feel like it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I just want to welcome the new folks in here. We're going to do a shorter session because I have prepared for more folks to come in. But we are talking about the history and arc of design and movement spaces, and some of the work that I have been able to do. And towards the end, we're going to talk about how you all are thinking about culture. And thank you, Eugene, for that suggestion. So coming out of the uprisings, some folks' political demand was to get Trump out of office, that it was unacceptable for him to be in office. And so InfraBL wanted to create a visual that felt organized, that felt like it continued along the culture of the uprisings that happened around the country, but got more explicitly political in the moment that the elections were happening, and that they were able to bring that presence, that energy, that culture from those uprisings to the polls. As alt-right folks and white supremacists were saying that they were going to show up to polls and engage in violence to scare people from voting, these folks were deployed across the country to also be at the polls as election protectors. And so these folks were dressed down. They brought mutual aid. They brought resources and snacks and water and all types of things to poll sites that marginalized folks were disproportionately using around the country, to make sure that folks felt safe, that folks seen, and that folks felt excited about being at the polls and contributing politically to this moment. And so this was seen, this was so prevalent and seen around the country that it ended up being the primary image on New York Times front page in their announcement that Biden beat Trump. And so this to me is something that often as organizers, we try to figure out how to quantify, like, oh, we're like contributing, we're investing to make a particular cultural intervention. Like, how do we know that it's powerful? The moment before this happens, I can't give you some specific metrics that tell you that you're meeting your goal, I can only tell you it's powerful and it's resonating. And then you see something like this, like that literally the New York Times is using the picture of this election protector in this design with these political demands to actually announce who the next president will be, and more importantly, announce that the person that stands against these values has been defeated, and most explicitly has been defeated. And so these are just some other things that I created, but these things are more so for students. And the idea is like, how do we figure out what academia and collegiate institutions look like, and how can we subvert the culture of those designs and flip them on their head to actually build design, political design for folks that have these political stances that are used to engaging on their school campuses and talking about these issues. All of that to say that for me, the important thread that moves through this is that culture should reflect the communities that you're trying to engage, that a cultural intervention is about doing some analysis about what are the cultural assets, what's the cultural climate, what are the cultural traditions and norms that community relies on, that a community is anchored in, and how can we either make an intervention in that, or how can we replicate that to make sure that folks feel seen, heard, reflected in the experiences, the values, and the vision that we're putting forth. And so I'm going to escape this really quick and just go over here. I think that, yes. So I think that one really cool and important thing, this for me doesn't come out, this doesn't sit in a vacuum for me, or like, this isn't like, oh, I just dreamt up this idea. For me, this follows in a long revolutionary tradition of building out propaganda, of building out visual assets to introduce people to a particular political ideology or political concept. And so I think about so many different political movements that had a particular visual identity. For instance, the Black Panther Party. A lot of the things that they put out were designed by Emory Douglas, who was the Minister of Culture at the Black Panther Party. And his work was to take their political concepts and make illustrations, to design their visuals so that they would be better digestible to the communities that they were passing them out to. I think another example are different anti-capitalist struggles across the world, the resonance of the red, the white, the black, the star, the Zapatistas and their balaclavas. There are so many different symbols and so many different colors that before somebody explicitly has to name their political ideology, you got a sense of what's going on. And the purpose of that for me is that you want your people to have a culture of belonging, and you want your people to be able to see, oh, this is my tribe, these are my people. Sorry, y'all. So yes, I'm going to show you all that in just a second. I think that along with design, some of the aspects that we were able to engage in during the uprisings were particularly building videos. How do we build multimedia assets that pull people in and make people feel like they belong to a larger thing that is united by values, that is united by a particular political opinion, and that people feel proud to be a part of that thing. Can y'all hear this? No? Is it hard to hear? Great. Give me 1 second.
It got better as you went.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop share, escape. Uh-oh. Okay. Share screen, share sound, share. Okay, let's try it. Present.
Who's next?
So I'm gonna pause this. This was in a moment where people, Hip Hop Harry was a meme, and was like this pop culturally popular graphic memes conversation in 2020. And so when at the height of that, when people were using this as a running joke online, we were able to create this video that showed all of the folks that were basically jumping into that Hip Hop Harry circle around a demand that the police would be defunded.
Who's next?
Okay. The other thing, can y'all hear me? Can you say something if you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thank y'all. For some reason, I can't see y'all anymore. So, so the next video that I'm gonna show is something that was more emotionally attention grabbing. And we created this with the intention that folks could see what's happening on the streets and folks could feel connected to what was happening on the streets, and like their experiences were being reflected. The grief of that, the rage, and the compelling need to take action.
To be right or wrong, a song for those who try.
I hope y'all were able to see that. So the point of that for me is that we were creating different platforms of multimedia. I was designing merchandise, but we were also figuring out, how do we design media? How do we build art? Like, how do we enlist artists to build visual art? How do we figure out how to create music? And all of these different art platforms to basically create content that appeals not only to multiple audiences, but appeals to the 5 senses. I think that in thinking about making cultural interventions, we have folks that are neurodivergent. I myself am, but we have folks who learn differently. And that means as communicators, as organizers, as designers, we have to actually create content that gets at all the different learning styles, the spectrum of learning styles, because they're not, when people say learning styles, I think people think that's left to the classroom, when it really means this is how people take in information, and how are we, and there's some centric ways that we rely on to communicate information to people. But as a person who had a mother who was an early childhood development teacher, the thing is, I know that the human mind only retains 15 minutes of information a day, and people have a spectrum of ways that they can actually digest and take in that information. And so we have to be just as dynamic as teachers in how we are communicating political concepts, so that our people are able to retain those political concepts and repeat them to other folks in order to bring them in to movement, in order to bring them in to the communities that we're building. And so I would say that there was a strategy there are multiple strategies that I've been engaged in, that at the very creative strategies and creative cultural interventions, where people are thinking about, so we got 5 senses. In no way do I think I think the 5 senses are truly a lazy effort to and a dated effort to articulate the sensory, to categorize the spectrum of sensory engagement and experience that we have as human beings. But if we work with those 5 senses, how are we engaging each one of those senses to pull people, to grab people emotionally and move them to commit to a particular political commitment, or grab them emotionally to get curious about a particular political concept? Do people have questions around what I just shared? Safi, can I ask what are you curious about around the culture of resistance?
Well, I'm curious about culture, as you're talking about culture, and as I see in the images and the sounds, the movement, all of what I'm seeing, and then what that is reminding me of, the memory that I have in my own body of that. But and I began to think about, there's a culture here. There's a culture that has been, and this is just not only from an American perspective, a global perspective, but particularly American and Black, right? For me. Excuse me, I'm not feeling well, because I'm not here, but
Feel better.
But that, what are the characteristics of the culture of resistance that have been formed over time, and that's expressing.
Yeah, I would say, Safi, were you done? I'm sorry if I interrupted you. Were you done?
No, I'm done. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So Safi, I would say that there, and the thing that I tried to hit on was that there are, I think of resistance. I think when we say resistance, I think of that as movement. And I actually like to think of movement as a universe, as like a multiverse, the way that people think of Marvel. And so there's a way that if we think of resistance as a universe, where each political struggle is like a constellation in that universe, then each one of those worlds of struggle, like we have migrant justice, we have reproductive rights, we have racial justice, we have criminal justice or abolition, we have environmental justice. So all of these different resistance movements in Black liberation organizing, we talk a lot about the Black radical tradition. The Black radical tradition is the legacy of political struggle and organizing being done that has led to this lifetime or this political iteration of Black liberation work. We know that the work that Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement was able to do in the past decade and a half is on the shoulders of the Black Panther Party's work, is on the shoulders of different Black political organizing efforts, on the folks who were fighting the drug war in the 80s and 90s. It's on the shoulders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Civil Rights Movement. And that's on the shoulders of folks who were Black tenant farmers during sharecropping days and had to organize for their rights as sharecroppers, which is on the shoulders of folks who did slave rebellions, who engaged in slave rebellions. And that's on the shoulders of Haitians who were engaged in slave rebellions in such that they built an independent nation. And so, sorry about that. So I would say, so that to me is just a very brief, very reductionist map of Black radical tradition. And in the same way, that each of these different political struggles have a legacy. In the same way that they have a political identity, they have a legacy of culture. There was a particular culture that you could attribute to the Black Panther Party. There's a particular culture that I would attribute to Che Guevara and Cuban Revolution, Fidel. There's a particular culture that I would attribute to environmental justice organizers. And I think that all of those come together to build a multiverse, a cultural multiverse that is resistance. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Reza, I am wondering if you could speak to the difference between Yes. Reza, what specifically do you want me to speak to around it?
Your experiences, maybe more than, again, just your experience.
Right, because this is a leadership this is a leadership thing. And so I would say that I got my start in doing design work as the Minister of Culture for BYP 100. When I was 13 years old, I started doing community organizing in tenants' rights on the South Side of Chicago. And so I had a decade of organizing experience. And that decade of organizing experience, when I was 23, I was like, I am moving to DC and I'm learning how to code because I asked myself, what do I care about most when organizers are building power? And what feels like the most fundamental tool that I personally care about? And it was how people were telling stories about marginalization, how people were telling stories about how a particular structural violence impacted them. And so I want to be able to flank or build make sure those stories can't be refuted by having a strong foundation. That led me to go to DC and learn coding. So SQL, R, all of the coding languages to be able to build data that could back up community stories, the stories that were being told. First thing I learned about data was that data is not, people treat data like, oh, here are the facts. Whoever the person is curating and cultivating that data, they are telling a story with numbers. And you could very well have a different data practitioner that could tell a different story, but it is who is invested in telling that story through numbers, and what questions are you asking to formulate and build that data. And data can't be treated like a fact, because it is impartial to the data collector. That was a very bleak life, doing data analytics and engineering for social justice movements. It didn't get me to where I wanted to be. And so then I transitioned over to doing communications and digital organizing, because I wanted to be able to help people strengthen the storytelling that they were doing. And I wanted to build strategies to make those, to make sure those stories were told as far and wide as they needed to be told. And then in doing that work, so often I think it's the experience of folks in communications work and digital organizers, communications associates. There's a thing that I would say political containers are learning. They have not learned yet. I would say pre-2020, when everybody glorified the organizer as the primary position in social movement containers, folks would hire a communications person, and that communications person would be responsible for narrative strategy, messaging, social media management, any flyers, which inherently just meant graphic design offhand, any emails, sending the email list, email management. I could go on and on about the amount of roles. And then that person is like paid like $45,000 and good luck. I just named a team, and people did not, and people in different political containers would hire one person and put all of those things in a job description and be like, great, please go forth and complete all of these things. And then folks would, in the check-ins, people are wondering why, oh, like our digital presence doesn't look like Color of Change. Color of Change has 100 employees managing their digital presence, managing their communication strategy and things like that. And so there's a way that in movement space, I would say 2020 and the pandemic really taught people the necessity and need to be thinking about their digital strategies, their visual strategies. How, if I can't invite people to a meeting and talk to them to convince them about a political concept, how am I building design online? How am I building a social media presence? How am I building a digital presence that inherently included design, excuse me, so that I could build relationship with people across screens, so that I could come into people's home and tell them what I believed in and move them to take action in a particular way, or move them into a commitment with a particular political container. And so I would say that design was consistently put on the back burner, which is why my presentation is usually an imploring people, imploring organizers and leadership within organizations to care about the creative strategy and care about the creative assets that you want to build. Care about it in the same weight as you care about the organizing and narrative strategies, and bring those folks into your campaigns, bring those folks into your strategy meetings and things like that at the same time that you're bringing in the organizers. Don't invite the illustrator on the back end now that you built the campaign. Every illustrator, every designer I know is also a strategist. They're just not used in that way. And they have ideas that can contribute to the larger strategy of things. And things would be just so much more visually appealing to our communities, to our people, if we were bringing in the creative minds into our team and our planning sooner. So often, the bane of my existence, and just truly the bane of my existence, and the plot of my villain origin story is organizations calling me, emailing me, and being like, hey, Fresco, we got this campaign, and we actually, the event is in 3 days, and we want t-shirts. We want t-shirts. We need 300,000 t-shirts, actually, because that's how many people we've organized. And yes, we only have our logo in the PNG or the JPEG of it. It does have a white background. Please put it on a t-shirt, but we want a really cool t-shirt. I gotta tell y'all, this is vulnerable. I have never not been contacted on the back end of a campaign, an event. I've never had, like, people will literally contact me to design items for a convening or for an event, and they'll do it months and months in advance. I'm like, oh yes, thank you. Oh, this timeline is so beautiful. We can really build the visual identity of this political thing that you want to introduce to people. And then they get overwhelmed with all the other aspects of creating the thing, that they drop that conversation with the designer and they pick it back up 3 weeks before the event. And they don't want a graphic. 3 weeks for a graphic? Nice, cool, got you. They want a whole swag bag of things that these people can take home and use in the future to come to actions. And so there's a way that if you get that designer on the front end, we can figure out how every single aspect of this strategy, of this planning, is visually appealing. And that's what I want. That's what it means for me, for marginalized people all over this world to experience beauty right here and right now. Not stop giving the struggle emails. I also do digital organizing training through Repower. And the fundamental most important thing that I really want to get across to digital organizers, these are usually people who are managing the social media content, building petitions, or managing the email list. There is a phenomenon in movement space where the digital organizer opens up the email box to write the email, and they like settle into that chair and they say, let me get the most boring that I can get. How do I write the driest email that I can? Hello, my name is Fresco and I'm here today to implore you. And I have to communicate. I'm not scrolling to the bottom. I'm not scrolling to the bottom where Macy's is having a semi-annual sale. And I've been waiting on that for my wish list for 3 months. You think I'm about to read this email? When the seal is having a plant sale, you think I'm about to read this email where you have written the boring most nonprofit foundation, nonprofit industrial complex email I ever read in my life? No, that's not. You have 3 seconds to grab the attention of your audience digitally. If you miss, and you really have 1.3 seconds to get someone to invest the 3 to 6 seconds, and if you don't actually grab their attention in that moment, then you actually won't get the attention necessary for them to read the first sentence. And in the first sentence, if you don't grab them emotionally in some way, then you actually don't ever get to make the ask. And so there's a way that I think the nonprofit industrial complex, the culture of the nonprofit industrial complex, makes everyone get really formal and boring. And they're like, the t-shirt must look like this. It must look ugly. It must. We can't make it pretty because then it won't be credible. This has to look like the forefathers of this country, you know? And there's a way that it's gotta look ugly for it to look legit. And I just really wanna flip that on its head so that we're not appealing to the people that everybody's writing grants to. We're appealing to the people in the community. We want them to think that we're cool, and we want to put intention into every aspect in order to make that necessary and make that happen. Because we're losing the cool factor. And yeah, our opposition gets the cool factor with their base. They pulled them red hats out. Those people ate them hats up, baby. Them kids had them hats on the Southwest Airlines. And they felt a deep belonging. And when a red hat saw a red hat, I see you, brother. Right on, baby. Right on. When a blue line sees a blue line, they're like, gotcha. We've got each other's back. Like, there's a way. Hitler's most invested in, I really obsess over studying the opposition. And Hitler's most invested in wing of defense, wing of attack, was his propaganda. He had a propaganda, what do you call it? A propaganda federation or something like that. He literally, and the way that they were able to communicate and grab people emotionally using design, storytelling, political values, these are human beings that were willing to do terrible, terrible things off of what they were being communicated and what the stories they were being told and what they were visually digesting. That's very powerful if we flip it on its head and actually organize those things in service to people's capacity for doing good. If people were willing to do the most insidious things, we can absolutely adopt some of those tactics or analyze some of those strategies and subvert them to organize people, to tell stories, to get folks visually ingesting things that compel them to do good in this world. And so that's what I came here to talk to you all about. If you all have questions, if you all have other points that this brings up, I just want to open the space for that. And thank y'all for listening and walking through this with me.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I did not expect what just happened. And I feel like I got like a master class in what you're in this, like in.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't retell it the eloquent and powerful and hilarious way that you just did it. But I'm like, oh my gosh, I just learned a whole lot for no money.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you for living your journey and sharing so much from it. I do have a question that I'm curious about that I put in the chat, and it's for you and it's for anybody else here who wants to answer it. And it's a little bit different. I mean, connected and different. And so I'm going to put it out there and I'll see if it solicits any response. So one thing, like the phrase radical imagination grabbed me in the name of the session. And I've been trying to support different groups I work with to like go into that imaginative artistic space. I'm a baby visual artist or like a toddler visual artist. And so
Excellent.
It's like, to me, it's that space of like, and the way that I've done it has been a very simple activity of literally like doing a guided meditation, visualization, close your eyes if you want to, keep them open if you're more comfortable. And like we are now in the liberated future, the equitable future. What are you seeing? Like going through the five senses, what do you see, smell, taste, touch, etc. here? And then bring people back from the guided visualization, and then like have them write it down on slides or say it out loud what they saw. And I like it, and I'm curious, like if people have tried other things to help people tap into imagination.
Mhm.
It's like so easy for us to just like see the here and now and like get pissed or discouraged. And like, how do we keep, what are some like actual practical activities and strategies for helping us tap into that like unbounded possibility?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say, and I welcome other folks to also join in. The first thing that I would say is like, as another early childhood education gem that I received from my mom is that in our formative years, we learn how to identify what's wrong with a situation for our safety. That's drilled into us. And so human beings are very, very good at figuring out which one of these things is not like the other. We are very good at dissecting and being critical of a thing. To the thing that wasn't asked as much, maybe some of y'all went to a Montessori, but the thing that wasn't asked as much was, here are these shapes. Instead of which one of these is not like the other, what type of shape would you invent? What type of shape would you create? And that is, there's a way that when we talk about abolition, Ruth Wilson Gilmore says that abolition is not just fire. Abolition is not just tearing something down. Abolition is also water. It is an intentional ideation about what are you willing to build in its place, in place of the current existing structure. And if you aren't invested and if you aren't invested in the building as much as you are invested in the tearing down, then we are in a dire emergency here. And so, shame doesn't work, but I do start off those spaces with imploring people that I don't just invite you to create if you want to create. We actually have a responsibility to create. We actually have a responsibility to be ideating just as much as we are critiquing and identifying what is wrong. We have to design new. And I think that creating those spaces, especially for organizers or folks who are engaged in political struggle, is especially hard because people are just getting barraged with everything that is wrong with the world. And so I think that you have to create a whole 360 rounded container that drops people into imaginative space. And that means that we have to, if we're eating, we have to experiment with the food. We have to create food together, or we have to understand the idea when someone created this food. If we are hearing something, then we have to be in the creation process of that. We have to give people so many sensory activations to actually organize their body into the space of creating, of ideation, of radical imagination of what's possible. So often we get in a room with 4 white walls and tell people, okay, let's start. Let's imagine what the future would look like without police. Doing that in this room? This room looks like the police. Like what? And so there's a way that I really care about us actually doing the tender work of curating the space and the activities that literally drop a person who's not used to engaging in the radical imagination into that. And in order to do that, it's going to look like some weird culty Burning Man situation in order to make that happen. And with activities like Safi is talking about, toys, play, improv, free flow movement, dancing, paint, but people have to be dropped into that in a intervention style way. Like, I'm really gonna take your phone, take these things that give you stress and remind you of what's wrong with the world, and really barrage you with the creativity. I'm really gonna go at you with it. Other folks?
Okay, that was amazing. And just for the record, sorry, I just want to say, like, for Safi and Fresco, like, whatever workshop you put together for like how to facilitate those things, like, I'm signing up for it.
Thank you.
Oh, I just read Julia's and I love collaging. Saying perfect timing.
Hi, sorry, I'm hiding behind my picture because I had a dental procedure and now I'm a little bit shy with my smile. Sorry. Yes, I'm well, I call myself a visual artist, sort of amateur, but I work with communities a lot. And I often use a collage because it's so, like, it doesn't require a lot of resources. I always have a stack of magazines and newspapers. And especially things that come from the community, like flyers and all that stuff. And it's very spontaneous, it's very fun. And we literally can destroy things that we don't like and create something instead, using the materials at hand. And thank you so much, Fresco. I was so captured by your talk, and I curiously was taking notes so that I don't lose it, all these ideas and expressions. And just thank you so much for welcoming me in this radically imaginative space. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank y'all also for rocking through this with me. Thank you for naming these things, Safi and Julia, in the chat as well. Raisa, were you about to give a contribution?
I was, but I know that Daniel and Elizabeth haven't been as vocal as myself, so I wanted to like just go to the background for a minute if there's any other new voices before I chimed in.
That's sweet of you. Hey, I'm just here from the events team, but I'm enjoying. I'm also an artist, and yeah, good stuff, y'all. Great to be on the sidelines and enjoying. Awesome. Keep it up. Solidarity.
Thank you, Daniel.
I was gonna say sometimes, I guess, you know, a lot of us participating are part of formal organizations or collectives of some way, but like pretty formal, right? Nonprofit, taxed correctly, payrolls, the things. And I think that sometimes you have to just simply go outside of those spaces. It's a little bit like what you were talking about, Fresco, the nonprofit industrial complex has norms or calls for norms, or we think it calls for norms, which keeps us in the, well, what is the logo box, and the newsletter has to start with this. Yeah. And like, you know, even, I mean, I have a hard time sometimes with like graffiti, right? Like, I'm just like, song lyrics too. Like, I'm somewhere like, give me the production, the lyrics are tough. Like, give me the colors in graffiti, but what's actually written is tough. But on the other hand, like, I don't mind being challenged in that way. And I appreciate like that some artists, some things just don't fit in the nonprofit industrial complex. So you have to create the space. And sometimes you can then bring it back in, the skills that you've learned and accumulated by being in your own space. But I think sometimes you have to do that work on the side. And there was one thing that you said earlier, Fresco, like very early on, just you said actually two different things, right? That there's no reason to say they're ors, but one is reflecting the now and one is reflecting what you want in the future. And I like pretty things. I like flowers. I like colorful flowers. A lot of the art that I make outside of like my work context has a lot of pretty in it, but I relate so much to what you said earlier, like we deserve pretty things. Give me pretty. I don't want to feel like there's something non-political about my identity because I put a lot of pretty things into my own personal art.
Yeah,
Mhm.
love that. Love that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that, Reza. Y'all, this has been absolutely beautiful. And that's all I have. Eugene says, I seriously thought pretty and movement commitment were unconnected. No, we're taking the bread and the roses, y'all. The bread and the roses. Our people
Love it.
deserve the fundamental, the commons, and they deserve the beauty of everything.
Beauty, the
Absolutely.
beauty.
Absolutely. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining me and engaging in this conversation. It was a small but mighty group, and it was really honestly beautiful to build with you all. And yeah, I will give you your, I think 10 minutes back. And
Oh, can we I have more questions for you.
oh yeah. Oh,
But
let's
if you're trying to end,
no,
okay.
no, I'm just
You've
gonna
been trying to end since I got here. Like 5 minutes in.
yeah. So what's your question, Eugene?
Okay. Now I have to make up a question. No, I'm just kidding. So I am curious. You had this activity you were going to do if we hit 10 people.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine that it would be a really fun, engaging activity.
No, it wasn't.
Oh,
It was it was basically what you all just did right now. It was just a series of questions around, and we were supposed to do breakout groups. Because
okay.
the request was that people
Okay.
be able to have some breakout group time of how are you thinking about culture? How are you thinking about creativity? And so just some questions.
Okay. That helps me. Thank you. That
Mhm.
satisfies my FOMO.
Uh-huh.
But now I'm realizing, okay, so these things that people so generously offered up, like toys, etc., some of them are IRL things where
Mhm.
like we have to be in person together.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious if people, like what people have tried in virtual gatherings to help people like get into imaginative space.
Mhm.
Like has Julia, have you tried collaging online or any other virtual space stuff?
I haven't tried it myself during the pandemic, but I've heard from my other colleagues who continued working in the community that they facilitated online sessions, but prior to that, they would send art and craft packages curated for each session to their community members. So people were still creating and having fun while being in isolation, but they're in the same online space, and then they were sharing their creation online, taking pictures and showing them. So I thought it's a neat idea, and of course you can do digital collage. But I think the value of art is that the tangible aspect of it, the tactile sensation, whether it's a Play-Doh, cutting, tearing out and pasting things, or playing with paint. So for that reason, I really thought that preparing packages and delivering or sending them to people was really neat.
I've created poetry templates that are sort of based around prompts. So basically folks can spend time brainstorming around the question of like, what do you see? What was there and what's there now? So it can be like a two-part process, asking folks to think about sensory related details, particularly visuals, and then having folks be able to move those items into like a poetry template. in the classroom, somewhat similar to that, I've had folks do individual brainstorms and then asked the other student to take their classmates' list and create a visual design to support what their classmate was talking about. In this particular instance, I can think of on the spot, it was sort of like a starting your own business type of a piece. And each student was allowed to brainstorm their own business, but then you had to work artistically in service to a classmate's vision instead of your own.
And I have participated in, I'm not led it, I've used it a little. I think that, you know, we have to use this tool. You know, we tend to sit and kind of bobblehead, you know, our way through meetings and, you know, all of that. I was in, I don't know if you all are familiar with U Theory, and they have a whole theater component of, you know, of this work, and they, you know, often work with social justice, some movement folks, but what was interesting and helpful, I think, was having, because it's all based on movement. It's somatic and it's based on movement. But in terms of the space, these spaces, these boxes that we're in as we're engaging with one another, to be really, really, to allow it to be very useful, to be able to move within the little box that you're in, move in and out of space, in and out of the space, slowly, quickly, close to the screen, back, and begin to see people dimensionally, you know, and not just these sort of images that are on the screen. And if you can, if you send me your email or something, I can, because I can't remember the name, and I can give you the link to their, you know, to their website, and then that way, or anyone who wants it, I'll send it to them. But they have a whole, it's a global organization that like really uses movement and somatics to get at an emerging future, to begin to live in, you know, that radical kind of imagination and opening for emergence to, you know, to come, or right. So that's their whole, you know, sort of focus. So I'll be happy to send that. Oh, you got it there. Great.
Thank y'all for these contributions. Folks have any other questions or final thoughts? You
Yes,
just,
thank you
okay.
so much. Yeah.
Thank y'all so much. This was a really beautiful space. I hope that this conference has really been an asset, and I hope that this session was able to contribute to that for y'all. I am going to drop my email.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask, and if there's like places where your art lives, and that goes for everybody.
So I am Fresco Siempre on social media, so on like Instagram, Twitter, and my email is fresco.stees@gmail.com. If you ever have any questions or want help with any ideas or things around creative strategy, I'm always down to help. You can hit me up on social media. You can hit me up through email.
All I know is I am never calling you like 3 weeks before and asking you to
Come on now. Please work with me.
Like, there's no way. If I need someone, I'll be like, I can't call Fresco though.
Do this. She already talked about this. All right, y'all. Have a great evening and afternoon. Oh, Reza.
I just found that template
if y'all give me like 30 seconds, I will share it. It's the brainstorm and poem sheet.
Okay.
And I used
Excellent.
it in one of those activities. I'm doing it. I swear, I'm just trying to make it so that everybody can have it without, like, you know what I mean? And then you make your copy and then la 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 la. You know, la 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 la. Nope.
Excellent.
That's
Perfect.
the name. Nope, that's the name of who you said did the thing. You see, I've been taking notes. Give me one more chance.
And
One more
don't forget,
chance.
right now you're only sending me. So like send it to everybody. Yeah. Okay, send it to everybody.
Here we go.
Okay, there you go. There you go. All right.
Thank you so much, Reza.
Yeah, beautiful.
No pressure. No pressure.
Thanks for generous sharing, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.